is related to the linear programming. So it is related to the linear programming. So all the equations are linear in this particular case. And further, why linear programming is being used and what is the application related to that, let me just tell you first of all. So over here, the company, if we are talking about some manufacturing company, in that particular case, it will be having different constraints. What would be the different constraints? Constraints means different issues the companies will be having in the production itself. It will be the case that the workers are available in limited, or it will be the case the working capital is limited, or it may be the case the working capital is limited, or it may be the case that the raw material is limited. So company want to use all these resources in such a manner that the company will be having an optimal output, Okay, so for that particular case, we use what? We use the linear programming, and this will be used in all those scenarios where we are having the linear equations, that is the equation of line itself. So what is the equation of line? I have already told you that is equal to y is equal to a plus bx. This is the equation of line. So when the equation of when the different variables are there in such a manner, in such a linear manner over there, in that particular case, we can work upon the linear programming and further get a optimal solution for the same. Okay, so constraints are known as deterministic. The probability of occurrence is presumed to be 1. The constraints are basically known as deterministic, that they will be definitely they will occur and do occur, and we do presume their probability equal to 1. And all these variables in this particular case must be non-negative. All those variables must be non-negative itself. Then it is related to the basic variables, slack variables. So all of this that we'll be learning thoroughly when we will be covering the questions related to it. You will better understand it over there. And let me tell you, related to the basic variables, if we talk about that, we are having the value of the company is producing 2 products, product 1 and product 2, and further it is producing 4 products in one day and 2 products in the same day. And further, in what manner the resources must be utilized so as to get the best output, so as to get the maximum profit, or we can say if the company wants to reduce their losses too. It is not always the case that we want to maximize something. It may also be related that we want to minimize our losses. Okay, so in both the cases, we'll be using what? We'll be using the linear programming itself. So in this particular case, if we consider P1 to be X and the P2 has to be Y, these would be related to what? These would be related to the basic variables. And further, when we are having the linear relationship and further having the inequality as lesser than equal to, in that particular case, we have to add something to the left hand side so as to make it equal to the right hand side. So if I say, just for an example purpose, if I say that 3 plus 2 is basically lesser than or equal to 8. It is lesser than or equal to 8. In that particular case, I have to add something on the right itself. So that will be related to what? M would be what? M would be the slack variable over here. So if the constraint has a sign of lesser than equal to, then something positive has to be added on the left side so as to make it equal to the right hand side. Okay, and also related to surplus variable, when we are having the inequality greater than equal to, if I say 3 plus 9 is equal to 8, in that particular case, I have to basically subtract. Something positive has to be subtracted. I have to subtract something from over here so as to make this equal to 8 over here. So in that particular case, I have to subtract. In that particular case, such variable, the n is said to be what? It is said to be the surplus variable. So that is something related to the theoretical part over here, and further we'll be covering related to some other theoretical components. That first of all, it says that bottlenecks in the productions can be identified. So what are the different constraints? What are the different issues so as to optimize our production? It is not always the case that we want to maximize it. It may also be the case we want to minimize something. Okay, so in both the cases, we can do work around the linear programming. So linear expressions in LP is known as the objective function. So linear expressions in the linear programming is known as the objective function. If I say that I want to maximize my profit, in that case, I'll be saying what? That will be my objective function. That I want to I want to maximize the profit. I want to maximize the profit. And for the linear inequalities and LP are known as what? These are known as the linear constraints. These are known as linear constraints. So those all will be covered when we will be solving the question based upon the linear programming itself. So the questions are not asked as such, but in case study itself, you'll be asked related to that how to solve the different iterations, or it may be the case that you are asked to form a table out of the different constraints or the different equations out of the constraints over there. So we'll be learning all those. So first of all, there are two approaches by which we can do solve the linear programming. First of all, it is the graphical approach, and the other one it is the simplex method. Other one it is a simplex method. So we will be covering with the question over here. So let firm ABC produces radios and TVs. Let firm ABC produces radios and TVs. Each radio costs rupees 500 in wages and 500 in material. So each radio costs 500 in wages and 500 in material. So we can say the cost of radio. So we'll be letting a radio as X. So we'll be letting radio as X and TV as Y. And further we are saying the cost related to the radio is 500 plus 500. And further related to the television itself, the cost is given to be 2500 plus 1500. That is a cost related to the television over here. The price of the radio is 2000 and the TV is given to be 6000 over here. The firm has having 10 hours of the machine time and 4 hours of the assembly time per day. So the total time that the company is having, the firm is having the 10 time machine hour and 4 hours the assembly hours. And for the radio requires 3 hours of the machine time. Radio requires 3 hours of the machine time and TV requires 1 hour of the machine time. So we can say that this basically would be equal to what? 3 of the X, because 3 hours are required in the radio itself, and further 1 hours are required in the machine time is required in the TV itself. So we can say 3x plus 1y is basically, it will be lesser than or equal to maximum machine time available, that is equal to 10. That is equal to 10. So that will be our first equation over here. So we can say that will be our first equation, because in case of the radio we require 3 times of the machine time as compared to that of the machine time required in the TV itself, and further the machine time is limited to 10 hours. So that is a constraint. So that is a constraint over here. That is a constraint over here, and inequality is basically equal to what? It is a lesser than or equal to inequality over here. Second over here, it is given to be around that we are provided that the assembly hour, total assembly hours per time, assembly time is given to be what? It is 4 hours a day, and radio requires 1 hours of the assembly time. So we can say 1x is plus, and further TV also requires 1 hour of the assembly time. So x plus y is will be lesser than or equal to 4. So that will be our second equation over here. Further, it is said that the firm is having 12,000 as cash. The firm is having the 12,000 as cash, and that is related to what? That is related to the financial constraint we are having. This is related to what? This is related to the financial constraint, because in that particular case we will not be able to procure more of the raw materials. That is related to the cost involved in producing the TVs and radios, and we want to do what? We want to maximize the profit over here. Okay, so the third constraint over here, it is the financial constraint given over here, and further over here, if we look at the particular statement over here, that is given to be the price of the radio is 2000 plus TV is 6000. The TV price is given to be 6000, and further it is related to be, it is given over there in this particular case that the cost is given. The cost is also given in the first very scenario that we just looked over here. So we can say 1000 of X, that the cost which we basically need to procure the raw material for. So 1000 of X plus 4000 of the Y, that is related to the television itself. 4000 of the Y, that is lesser than or equal to what? That is lesser than or equal to 12,000. That would be the third constraint over here. That will be the third constraint over here. So first of all, kindly please do confirm if you are understanding related to that how we did form these different equations over here. Let me explain to you again. So we were having the total assembly machine time of 10 hours and total assembly time of 4 hours. Okay, and we need to distribute of these resources. We need to distribute these resources, and further it is also given over here that we are also having the constraints related to the finance over here. So also we need to distribute those resources, and all the resources must be divided in such a manner that we will be able to maximize our profits out of it. So these are the different constraints over here. These are the different constraints over here. Is that clear? Okay, now let's move further. So it says that how much the TVs and radios must be produced so as to have the maximum profit. So that is related to objective. So this is the objective related to it that we need to approach. This is the objective that we need to approach over here. And objective function will be representing by Z over here. So what it is actually that we want to maximize our profit over here. We want to maximize our profit over here. So let's have a look over here. So Z is equal to what? Z is equal to 1000 plus 2000x. Why it is 1000 plus 2000x? Let me explain to you why it is so. So the cost related to the radio, it is 1000 rupees. So the cost over here related to the radio, it is 1000. And further, what is the price of the radio that we are selling the radio at rupees 2000? So what is the profit out of rupees of one radio? It is rupees 1000 is a profit. And for the cost of the TV, it is given to be 2500 plus 1500, that is 4000 rupees. And further, we are selling the TV at rupees 6000. So the profit over here is 2000 in case of TV. X is related to radio and Y is related to TV, and that is the function that we need to maximize. And that is the function that we need to maximize over here. That is related to what? That is our objective function over here. So we can simply say that we need to maximize 1000x plus 2000y. 1000x plus 2000y, that is our objective. Is that clear? In the graphical method, we are having the different linear equations and inequalities over here, and further we'll be solving the value for the different lines over here. So over here, actually, we are having the three of these equations, that is x plus y equal to 4. We just consider the inequality into the equality. X plus y equal to 4, 3x plus y equal to 10, and further the last one, we basically x plus 4y is equal to 12. Okay, so that is these are the inequality, and further for the different values of the x, we basically calculated the value of y. So when the x is equal to 1, x is equal to 1, y is equal to 3, because it will be equal to y is equal to 4 minus 1, that is equal to 3. When x is equal to 2, y is equal to 2. When x is equal to 3 and y is equal to 1 over here. And similarly for the other equations too, we are having the different values, and further we calculated the different values over here. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? So that is related to it. Now we will be basically plotting these points. We'll be plotting these points on the graph itself. We'll be plotting these points on the graph itself. So kindly please pay attention over here. Kindly please do pay attention over here. So we are having this particular graph over here, and further on the scale of the x-axis and y-axis, on the scale of the x-axis and y-axis, we basically drew these particular plots that we are having above. That is just for information and for just your knowledge only, because such type of questions will not be asked, but that is very much necessary from the concept point of view. So over here we drew the different graph lines over here. 3x plus 4 is equal to 10, and further x plus 4y is equal to 12, x plus y is equal to 4, and further we drew these all different lines. Okay, now over here we will be looking, we are basically concerned about the area that is being satisfied by all the lines over here. So we basically draw three different lines, this particular line, that one, and the third one, and this is the common area that is being satisfied, that the area under each and every line, and the common area that is being satisfied, this is the area which is being satisfied by each and every line. Because we'll not be basically focusing on that particular area, we'll not be focusing on this particular area, because in this particular area we are not able to basically satisfy one or more of the constraints. Is that clear? So we are basically concerned about what area? We are concerned about the area that is beneath the lines over here, and that is a common area that is beneath each and every line over here. Okay, so this area we are concerned about. Now over here we are basically concerned about what? We are concerned about the profit, maximum profitability that we want to have. Maximum profitability that we want to have. So we will be learning about we will be basically considering the ISO profit over here. We'll be basically concerned about the ISO profit over here. Now what is ISO profit? ISO profit is basically a line. It is basically a line which will be basically, we will be starting from the point over here, and it will be parallel to this particular line. And at the point over here where it will be cutting the D point over here, that will be the maximum, that will be the point where we'll be having the maximum profit. So this is just for your concept purposes, and I am just telling you again and again that this particular method will not be asked in the exam itself, but you must be knowing the concept related to it, because one-liner questions, or we can say statement type questions, can be asked in that particular case. So you must be aware of the term what is ISO profit. That is what is iso profit. So iso profit is a line which is basically drawn along the 0 point to the line over here, and further the slope of the line over here will be equal to minus 1 by 2. Why it is so? Because in the case of the radio you were making a profit of rupees 1000, and further in the case of the television you were making a profit of rupees 2000. So the slope over here that we comes out to be, that is minus 1 by 2, that will be the slope of the line, and further that will the line when it will be cutting the point D over here, that will be the maximum profit point over here, where we'll be having the maximum profit and we will be having the optimal solution related to the problem, that is the objective function 1000x plus 2000y is equal to z over here. Is that clear? So that is all related to what? That is all related to the graphical method. It is all related to the graphical method over here. Next, in the second method, we'll be considering the simplex method. Simplex method is quite, you can say, typical than the graphical method, but it works actually in the case of the two variables over here. It is, we can basically figure it out in the 2D model. But if there are 3 models, in that case the model must be, your graphical representation must be 3D, and that is not possible, quite possible if you are having 4 or more variables. But definitely when you are having the 4 or different more variables, that can be worked around with the help of the simplex method. Okay, so we will be basically looking at the simplex method also, and we'll be learning the different concepts related to it. So that's all related to what? All related to the graphical method approach. Second approach, it is related to what? It is related to the simplex method. It is related to the simplex method over here. Okay, we'll be starting again with a question over here. So it says a company manufactures cricket bats and chess sets. Each cricket bat gives a profit of rupees 2, and for the chess set gives a profit of rupees 4 over here. And further we are given with the information that there are 3 different workshops, workshop 1, 2, 3, and availability of hours per day 120, 72, 10, and for the cricket bat sets that they are able to prepare, able to manufacture 4, 6, 2, 6, 0, 1. And if the company wants to maximize the profit, how many cricket bats and chess sets should it be producing per day? In that case, how many bats and chess set it must be producing per day? So we want to basically maximize z is equal to 2b plus 4c. Why 2b plus 4c? Because we considered the bat as b and chess set as c, and further for each of the bat the profit of is rupees 2, and for each of the chess set the profit is of rupees 4, and we want to maximize this function. That is the objective function over here. That is related to the objective function over here. Okay, and further if we just look at the different workshop data over here, we can say 4 plus 6 is equal to 120. 4b plus 6c is lesser than or equal to 120, and for that is related to workshop 1, and for workshop 2 and 3 the data would be something like that. And these are basically b and c are what? B and c are our basic variables. B and c are our basic variables in this particular case. These are the basic variables. Okay, and further actually let me tell you that whensoever we are to use a simplex approach, we will be forming z is equal to we will be adding the values to it. And how it is possible? Because I just told you, first of all you need to work around this inequality. I already told you when the inequality is lesser than or equal to, in that case you'll be adding something to the left hand side. So it will be 4b plus 6c plus 1m. We'll be considering it to be 1m. We don't know what is the value of the variable over here, so we'll be adding 1m is equal to 120. And for the second one it will be equal to 2b plus 6c plus 1n and is equal to 72. And for the third one it is equal to 0b plus 1c, 0b plus 1c plus 1p is equal to 10 over here. So that will be related to these 3 equations. And further if we want to maximize this particular objective function too, we must be rewriting it. So if we want to make it equal, because m and p are not over there, basically included in that particular case, so we can write the z function as what? We can write the z function as z is equal to 2b plus 4c plus 0m plus 0n plus 0p. Okay, and further we can rewrite it as z minus 4b minus 4c minus 0m 0 plus 0n plus 0p equal to 0. So these are what? These are our basic variables. Which one are? ZBPP. Z, B, P, these are our basic variables. Okay, and so we'll be writing our basic variables, and further we have mentioned all data over here in the form of the table over here. Okay, so that is the same thing that I just explained to you. So we are having Z minus 2B minus 4C minus 0M minus 0N minus 0P is equal to 0, and related to the other workshop 1, workshop 2, workshop 3. Okay, and we just represented the coefficient of these variables in the table form. Coefficient of these variables in the table form itself. So we are having the Z, B, C, M, and P over here. So we just write it the coefficient over here. So it is equal to what? In the first equation, we are having the coefficient equal to Z equal to 1, B is equal to minus 2, minus 4, 0, 0, 0, 0. Solution is equal to 0. And further in the second one, it is equal to 4. We are having the value of Z equal to 0 over here, B is equal to 4, C is equal to 6, M is equal to 1, 0, 0, and solution is 120. And for all the variables and for all the different equations over here, we have mentioned the values therein. Okay, now you'll be basically looking at because we want to maximize the Z function. That is our objective. We want to maximize the Z over here. That is the objective function. We want to maximize it. So for that particular purpose, we want to basically make all the negative values. We want to basically remove all the negative values. So first step would be there that you will be looking at the most negative value. In the Z function line over here. So that is related to minus 4. So that is related to the minus 4 over here. So related to this particular line, you'll be considering all the solutions. Related to this particular column over here, C column over here, that is the most negative, we will be considering the solutions over here, and we will be basing and having an average related to it. And how it is possible? So we will be having the C column over here, that is equal to minus 4, 6, 6, 1. Further, we are having the solution value is equal to, if we look at the solution value, it is equal to not to mention this one because we're just looking at this particular value, and for the other one it will be equal to 120, 72, and 10 over here. And further, we'll be calculating the average. How we'll be calculating the average? So it will be 120 divided by 6, 72 divided by 6, 10 divided by 1. So 120 divided by 6, that is equal to 20. 72 divided by 6 is equal to 12, and 10 divided by 1 is equal to 10. So in that particular case, we'll be basically looking at the least positive value. Out of the average, we'll be basically looking at the least positive value. That is equal to what? That is equal to 10 over here. So 10 is the least positive value. 10 is the least positive value in this particular case. Is that clear? So this is the least positive value, and over here we are having the least negative value. So we will be basically finding the intersection of this. So that will be the intersection. Related to it. So one is the intersection related to it. I'm just explaining these steps again over here. So first of all, we just had mentioned the coefficient of the different equations in this step table format first of all, and further we want to maximize the Z over here. We want to maximize the Z function over here. So we'll be doing what? We will be basically removing all the negative values. And what is the most negative value in the Z row over here? That is minus 4. That is related to C. So we picked up all the values of the Z C row over C column over here, and further the solutions, and found the average, and then looked at the solution for the same. And further we just found out that the 10 is the least positive in this particular case. 10 is the least positive in this particular case. So we'll be doing what? So that will be basically forming what? That will be forming your pivot row. So that will be said to be your pivot row. And this will be said to be one over here will be your what? The intersection point. The intersection point from the C row, that will be forming your, that vertical one is basically your pivot entry. That is your pivot entry over here. Okay, are you understanding this point over here? So P is the pivot row, and 1 is over here the pivot entry. 1 is the pivot entry in this particular case. Now we will be basically forming a new table out of this. First step that you need to cover, that will be replacing, the first step would be related to now in the first, these are said to be iteration. So that will be the first iteration. That is the first iteration that we are going to cover. And in this particular case, first of all, we'll be doing what? We will be replacing P by the C over here. So we'll be replacing P by C. That is a methodology that you need to follow. So first of all, we have just mentioned the coefficient over here. We want to minimize the negative value, so we'll be looking at the maximum negative value, and further against we found out the solutions. We just looked at the least positive value, and we were confirmed about the pivot entry and the pivot row over here from this particular point. That is a intersection between these two, so this is the pivot row and this is the pivot entry that is at the intersection, and you will be replacing the pivot row by C over here. So C will be replaced by over here. Okay, so let me show you the new row over here. Okay, so kindly pay attention to it over here. So we are having the Z, M and C over here. So how did we just changed all the value? So for the pivot row itself, that was related to the P row. I just told you that we'll be replacing the C. We will be replacing the pivot row with the C column over here. And how we'll be replacing? Because that was related to what? This was basically our what? This was the pivot row. Over here. And for the pivot row, the rule says the current pivot row divided by the pivot entry. So what is a pivot row? Pivot row is basically 0 over here, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 10 over here. And what was the pivot entry? Over here, pivot entry is 1 over here. So the new entry in the pivot row, that is a new table we have drawn beneath. For that particular purpose, it will be equal to 0 divided by 1. That would be the values will go like 0 divided by 1, 0 divided by 1, 1 divided by 1, 0 divided by 1 over here, 0 divided by 1, 1 divided by 1 and 10 divided by 1. Because it is 1 over here, so it will remain unchanged. In this particular case. Is that clear? And for all the other rows, the formula will go like what? The formula will go like the current row. Likewise, if you want to calculate the value for this 72, how will we be calculating it? So it will be 72, and further next it says what? It says the pivot entry. Now what is the pivot entry? For the same? The pivot entry for the 72, it is 6 over here. And further, what will be the new pivot entry? It is 10 over here. What is the new pivot row over here? What is related to the pivot new pivot row over here? So pivot entry is basically 6 over here. And what is the new pivot row? That is the new row that we just covered over here. Just let me remove this table from over here so that I can make you understand well. Okay. So now pay attention to both of these tables. I'm just zooming it out. So over here, we are basically concerned about calculating the value for this particular column over here. So 72 and minus will be subtracting what? The pivot row. The pivot row for 72 is 6. So it will be 6, and the new pivot entry, that is 10, we have covered over here. Okay, so first of all, what steps you need to follow? First of all, we will be writing the new pivot row. We will be writing the new pivot row. How we just did calculate the new pivot row? It was the pivot row divided by the pivot entry. Okay, so we just wrote the pivot row over here. That is a new pivot row. And further over here, we are having the right entry, that the current row 72 minus the pivot entry over here. Pivot entry is 6 over here in this particular case, and further multiplied by the new row, that is equal to 10. So it will be equal to 72 minus 60, that is equal to 10. 72 minus 60, that is equal to 12 over here. And if you want to calculate it for the second one, how did we just calculate it? 60 over here. So for 120, we will be calculating. For 120, it will be 120 minus, what is the pivot entry? It is 6. And further, what is the new pivot entry? That is 10. So that is equal to what? That is equal to 120 minus 60. So it will be 60. And for the value over here at the very top, that is equal to 0, will be calculating as minus. And further, the pivot entry is minus 4. And further, the new pivot entry over here, that is basically again 10 over here. So it is minus 4 into 10. So it will be what? It will be equal to 40. So it will be 40 over here. So that is how we just calculated the values. For the pivot row, we calculated the values by row divided by the pivot entry, and for all the other rows you need to calculate the values by using the formula current row minus the pivot entry and further divided by the new pivot entry. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? We will be solving the another iteration too, and you'll be getting to know about it, that how it is possible. So we did calculate it for all the rows and columns over here, and this particular table was formed. And this particular table was formed over here. That is a table number 2 over here. That is a table number 2 over here. This was formed out of it. But still we are having the issues out of it. But still we are having the issues for this. What are the issues? Because we want to maximize the z function over here and still having the negative sign in this particular case. We're still having the negative sign in this particular case. So that will be what? That will be actually the negative sign will be forming what? We will be selecting this particular column. So we'll be doing what? We'll be selecting this particular column over here. So first of all, we'll be selecting this particular column. And further, now for this particular column, we'll be looking at the solutions in the same manner we did before. So we're just looking at the solutions. For all the solutions we just wrote over here. And further, we'll be finding the average. We'll be finding the average. So it will be 60 divided by 4, 12 divided by 2, 10 divided by 0. And further, the least positive value out of this is related to 6. It is related to this particular solution over here. That is related to 12. So n will be your what? N will be over here your pivot row. That will be forming your pivot row, and 2 will be your pivot entry. Are you getting this particular point? So now 2 is our pivot entry, is a new pivot entry over here. And further, n is what? N is your pivot row in that particular case. And further, when we are to form the new table, how we'll be writing this new table? How we will be writing this table? If I just say that I want to write all the values, if I say that I want to write all these values and I just remove all the values from here, how will I be writing? For the pivot row, I just told you the new values would be equal to what? Those will be equal to pivot row divided by the pivot entry. So you need to look on the previous table over here. I'm just removing these values so as to make you understand how we did just write these values over here. So just pay attention over here. So this is a pivot row. This is the pivot row that we formed, and this is the pivot entry. And this is a pivot entry. So the new pivot row would be equal to 0 divided by 2 and 2 divided by 2, 0 divided by 2, 0 divided by 2, 1 divided by 2, minus 6 divided by 2, and 12 divided by 2. So that is what we have to write over here. So that will be equal to we just write over here. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? So we will be writing not 1 over here, but it will be what? It will be 0.5. It will be 0.5 in this particular case. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? So this is how we will be solving for it. And further, I'm just solving this particular column that is related to solution column. I'm just going to solve the solution column for you. Let me solve the solution column for you for making you understand that how we can solve the different values for the other rows. For the pivot row, I just made you understand that how we are just solving the value for the pivot row. And for all the other rows, the formula goes like if we want to calculate for this particular value, the formula goes like 10 and further minus the pivot entry for this particular row is 0. It is equal to 0. Okay. And further, it is to be multiplied with what? It is to be multiplied with the new pivot entry, and new pivot entry is 12 in this particular case. So it will be equal to 10 again. So I'll just putting 10 over here. And further, if I want to calculate for 60, how will I be solving it? It will be 60 minus the pivot entry for 60. It is 4. And multiplied by the new pivot entry. New pivot entry is equal to 12. New pivot entry is equal to 12 again. So it will be 60 minus 48. So I'll be just writing the values again over here. So it will be 60 minus 48. Okay, that is how we'll be writing the values over here. So it is mentioned, actually this is actually mentioned over here. That is related to second iteration. That is mentioned over here. And please wait and let me do the needful so that, okay. Okay, so we are basically having the same table as such from the top over here. And I just mentioned the pivot row and the pivot entry from here, that is equal to 2. And from here we'll be writing the new table. That is basically the new entry, the new row that we mentioned over here. It is basically 0 for the pivot row. It will be 0 divided by 2, 0, 2 divided by 2, 1, 0 divided by 0, 2, again 0, 1 divided by 2, 0 0.5, minus 6 divided by 2, that is minus 3, 12 divided by 2, that is equal to 6. So that is basically our new pivot entry. That is basically related to our new pivot entry. These are the new pivot entry. So basically, actually, I was just looking at the wrong table over here. So our new pivot entry is basically equal to these. These are our new pivot entries. And how we just solve the value for the 40 over here? 40 value would be equal to what? Or 40 value will be equal to 40 minus the pivot entry for this is equal to minus 2. So it will be minus 2. And further multiplied by the new pivot entry, it is equal to what? It is equal to 6. It is equal to 6. So it is equal to 40 minus minus is plus, 6 into 2 are 12. So it is equal to 52. So it is 52 over here. For the 60 value over here, how we can solve it? For the 60 value, it will be equal to 60 minus the pivot entry, that is equal to 4. And for the new pivot entry, for the 60, it is equal to what? It is equal to 6 over here. It is equal to 6 over here. So into 6. So how we will be solving it? So 60 minus 24, that is equal to 36 over here. 60 minus 24, that is equal to 36 over here. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? If we look at the value related to that, if we want to calculate the value for the minus 2, if you want to calculate the value over here for the minus 2, what would be the answer related to it? What would be the answer related to it? The value over here, we are having the value over here related, the entry is equal to minus 2, and further minus sign over here, and again minus 2, and further multiplied by the new pivot entry, that is equal to 1. So multiplied by 1, so it is equal to minus 2 plus 2, that is equal to 0. That is equal to 0. So it turns out to be 0 in this particular case. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? And if we want to calculate the value for the 4 over here, for this particular value, if you want to calculate the new value in the table itself, how we will be calculating it? It will be 4. The pivot entry over here is minus 2. And what is the new pivot entry? It is equal to minus 3. The new pivot entry is minus 3. So it is equal to 4. Minus 2 minus 3 is equal to minus 6. Minus is plus, and plus minus is minus again. So it will be equal to 4 minus 6 is equal to minus 2. So it basically comes out to be minus 2 again. It's not difficult, but you need to pay attention to it. It's quite easy, but let me tell you that last time and also from last to last time, 5-mark question was asked from this only, that you need to write the entries related to it. What would be the entry related to it? Replaced entry of n. Yes, I already told you that we need to replace this particular column. We need to replace n by b over here. So we just wrote n by b over here. In the first iteration, we basically replaced p by c. In the second iteration, we are going to replace n by b over here. So that is related to it. And further related to this particular row, that is a pivot row. I already told you in the very for the pivot row how we'll be solving it. For the pivot row, it's quite easier. I'm just writing it again over here. So the pivot row calculation goes like pivot row, that is a current row, divided by the pivot entry for the pivot row itself. Okay. And further for all other rows, it goes like key row entry minus the row entry minus the pivot entry multiplied by the new pivot entry. Is that clear? Is that particular part clear over here? So this is how we'll be solving the values. Okay. And you need to repeat these iterations again and again till we are having all the positive values in this particular case. And that is how we'll be solving the maximizing the value using the simplex method in this particular case. Okay, so that would be all related to this particular video. So I just made you understand related to the basic variables. We understood that what are the basic variables. Okay, further related to slack variables. Slack variables are those variables which are added to the left hand side when the inequality sign is lesser than equal to. And then there were the surplus variables. Surplus variables, when you are having the inequality sign greater than equal to, then something is to be subtracted from the left hand side. Those are basically related to the surplus variables. And further, two methods that we covered, one it was a graphical method and the second one was related to the simplex method. So you must be knowing the fact that how we'll be forming the constraint equations, and further how we'll be fitting the data. I'll be fitting the data into the table itself, and further we'll be solving the iterations for the same. So the simple steps, those are to be followed if you are to maximize. If you are to maximize the simple steps, those are to be followed. First of all, we want to remove all the negative values. We want to remove all the negative values. And second, it is related to look at the least most negative value. Look at the most negative value, and further find the solutions. Find the solutions with least average value, with the least positive value. And further, we will be finding the pivot entry and pivot row. Pivot entry and pivot row. Okay. Further, you need to find out that how we'll be calculating the values for the pivot and pivot row and for the other rows itself. Okay, so that is how it works. So that would be all related to this particular video.